Macintosh is the time of the year when retro YouTubers bring out their vintage Macs. So let's join in and mess around with some vintage Macs. Let's start with a troublesome color classic here. I have already tried to fix it several times. And I thought I had fixed it, but then it started to misbehave again. This machine is a bit moody, so I'm not sure how it's going to behave today. So let's find out. Wow, that is a noisy hard drive. I'm gonna have to swap it for something better. Okay, we've got some kind of graphics. Sometimes this machine just has a black screen. Actually, those colors look pretty good. So one of the problems with fixing this machine is that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's kind of hard to troubleshoot the faults while the system is actually working. Okay, so unfortunately at the moment this machine is just working. Well, in that case I'm gonna leave this machine on for a while and we'll work on something else. And hopefully the fault will return, so we can work on this machine too. Actually, I didn't have to wait for too long. The image is now slightly unstable. By the way, we have recapped both boards in this machine, but unfortunately that didn't help. Well, this is kind of hard to troubleshoot, because the image is almost normal, but occasionally it moves slightly. So I'm gonna wait some more, see if it gets any worse. Okay, while we wait for the Color Classic to start misbehaving, let's see if we can fix this Power Macintosh 7600-132. This machine was working when I got it, probably about 4 years ago. But when I pulled it out a couple of weeks ago, it just gives me a black screen. I can hear the hard drive spin up when I turn the machine on. But that's it. Nothing on the display. This machine is partially disassembled, so I have a few bags of parts for it. To get inside we need to push on 2 tabs underneath the front panel and then pull the cover off. This machine has a rather interesting case design. Unlike anything else I have worked on, just like the blown up pets, this machine has a kickstand. It actually has 2 of them. So one on the side here, and this vent grill is hinged on this side. And then it's locked with 2 locks. By unlocking them, we can tilt the entire drive cage out. The drive cage will then rest on this kickstand here. Pretty nifty. Inside the machine there is a second kickstand here that mostly acts as a lock. With the 2 kickstands out, the drive cage sits very firmly in its upper position and gives us access to the entire motherboard. The CPU in this machine is installed on a separate card. On the motherboard we have a massive amount of slots. I have never seen a motherboard quite like this one. It also has 2 SCSI connectors up here. 1 floppy connector, 1 cable for CD audio and 2 power connectors. I think this is as far as I've been inside this machine. So the rest is going to be guessing. But I can clearly see a screw inside the standoff here. So let's remove it to free up the motherboard. And that's the only screw I could find. I guess the next thing is to disconnect everything from the motherboard. And the rest seems to be some kind of quick release system. There are 2 tabs here, so let's push them down and see if we can slide the motherboard out. Sure enough, here comes the motherboard. So it's just held down by these plastic tabs here, locked with this lock down here. Now that is a pretty heavy motherboard, and here's the reason for it. It's jam-packed with chips on the underside, mostly VLSI chips, but we also got something from AMD here, TI and Philips. Well, being a machine this age, our main suspect is of course electrolytic caps, and I've actually never seen electrolytic caps underneath a motherboard before. So that is definitely a first, and there's a whole bunch of them on the side of the board too. I checked every single cap here, but they're actually not leaking, but they can obviously still be bad, and we have some more on the CPU card underneath that heatsink. Well, I counted the caps, and there are about 40 caps on this board. So I'm going to be skipping quite a lot, otherwise I'm going to bore you to death. Most of them are the usual 47 micro 16 volt caps. Very typical for Macintoshes of this age. so that's why I have so many in my stash. And apparently we also have a pretty thick ground plane inside this board, so that would explain why it's so heavy too, because at least this cap here is not coming off easily. Oh, I see. I think it's glued. With enough heat it lets the cap go eventually. I think I'm just gonna do them one by one to avoid making any mistakes. I'm gonna clean the pads with some good old wick. And of course clean up that flux. And then a splash of solder on one of the pads. That solder actually took a while to melt. So we've got some thick planes inside this board for sure. I may have to increase the temperature slightly. And apparently I didn't go with those red caps for once. So now we can reflow that pad. Yeah, that solder melts very slowly. So I think I'm gonna crank up the temperature. Now we can solder the other side of the cap. Like so. These caps are very similar to the original caps. So I'm going to mark them to avoid making a mistake. In fact, I'm going to mark all the old caps. That way I can easily see if I have missed one. Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself for quite a while here. So I'm going to replace a few caps and skip ahead here, unless something interesting happens. Okay, so I removed about 10 of those 47 micro 16 volt caps from underneath the board. But we also have this smaller cap here. I think it's a 10 microfarad 16 volt cap. There are some absolutely tiny ceramic caps very close to these electrolytic caps. So I have to keep an eye on those. They are very easy to blow off the board. So overall this board is very slow to recap because of that glue. But aside from the glue, no drama so far. There is a sticker on the motherboard here with 97 and 8 written on it. And the chips on this board are slightly older, so that's probably when this machine was made. This board is so clean. And since the caps haven't leaked, I'm not going to bother washing this board. I'll just quickly clean up the flux and some IPA on a Q-tip. This board should be clean enough to use. I also check the polarity marked on the board before I start recapping, because occasionally it's not marked, and in worst case it can actually be marked incorrectly. After the recap I also check the polarity of all the caps I have installed to make sure I didn't make any mistakes. Well, 10 caps would be a pretty normal amount of caps to replace on a motherboard. But we still have 30 more to go on this side. And some of these caps are too close to plastic parts to use the rework station. So I lowered the temperature significantly. And then I'm going to add some chip quick on the pads on some of these caps. Like these two for instance, that are sitting very close to the SCSI connector. Now this could be challenging because this side of the board is so crammed. We also have some tiny components very close to these caps. But we're doing pretty well so far. So these guys here are 10 microfarad 16 volt caps. So if I just reheat and gently push on the cap, it comes off without risking damaging the pads. Before we can reinstall the new caps, we have to make sure to remove all of that chip quick, because it's not as strong as proper solder. So we need to make sure that we get all of it off the board. And that's easily done with some wick and good flux. The wick is abrasive, so I make sure not to push with the tip. I just let it float on top of the pads. Yeah, and I actually remember this machine. I bought it from a guy who was heavily into the stock market. So the hard drive was completely filled up with stuff about how to invest on the stock market. Perhaps I should have read it and learned something. I'm sure it pays a lot more than making YouTube videos. I'll see if it's still left on that hard drive. And perhaps there won't be a video next week. Okay, maybe we have something interesting here. As soon as I started to heat this cap up, it immediately started to pour its electrolyte out from underneath. That usually takes a while, but this guy here just immediately started to pour that damn thing out. Now, what might be interesting here is that it's the closest cap to the VGA connector here. So maybe this cap was causing our issue. I obviously can't say for sure. Well, this is a bit odd. There's actually a switch here, right on the motherboard. I wonder what it's for. And then there's also this connector here. I'll see if I can find some more information about this machine, and I'll share it later in the video. And this board also has some unused pads for electrolytic caps, so I have to pay attention so I don't mix them up. Well, I think we have an issue here. We've got a weird cap at the back of the board here, close to the PCI slots here. It's marked 47 4S 6K6. Now what the heck kind of cap is this? I guess we need to measure it and see if we can figure this out. Okay, let's see what this guy is. Not ideal having to measure the caps. Okay, we've got 46.5 microfarad. So definitely a 47 micro cap. But what's the 6K6 thing? It's definitely a relatively low voltage, since it's so small. Now I'm just worried that it's some kind of special low ESR cap. Well, obviously, if you know what cap this is, then please share below. And I can always replace it if I make a mistake here. Okay, I did some research online and I found two cap lists. And according to both lists, C56 here is specified to have a 10 microfarad 16 volt cap. So I'm not sure what to believe here. If you have one of these boards, I obviously would be interested to know what cap you have installed here, because the original cap was clearly a 47 micro. So for now I'm going to install a 10 microfarad 16 volt cap here, and perhaps I'll change it if we can figure this out. Okay, I finished the board, and aside from the caps with the two values we have replaced so far, it also has this neat row of 4.7 microfarad 25 volt caps, very close to the CPU slot here. And speaking of which, the CPU contraption here has some caps too. So let's start by removing the heatsink and see what we will find inside here. So this is obviously a pretty high spec machine and clearly designed to be very upgradable. This is a pretty beefy heatsink for 1997. Okay, and here's our board. We've got 4 of these 47 micro 16 volt caps here. A 44 megahertz crystal. Now let's see what we have. We have an IBM PowerPC 604BE running at 132 megahertz. Don't know what that BE stands for, but the 604 has 16K of level 1 cache and was designed for high performance workstations and entry-level servers. If you're an expert at these machines, I'd love to know what the fastest card this machine will take. I'd love to max this machine out. And I just found what was causing this machine not to boot. Check out these crispy pads. That is definitely a leaky cap. The solder is so corroded, there are actually small bits falling off. So that could definitely be the cause to why this machine wouldn't boot. Well, I'm glad we caught it on time. I don't think it has caused much damage yet, but there is actually some corrosion on this pad here, so I will inspect it in a minute. First, let's get this nasty cap off the board. This cap smells really fishy. Leaky old caps, they smell like dead old fish, left to rot in the sun. It's an absolutely nasty stench. This board has a couple of unused pads too. So I marked them not to make any mistakes when I replace the caps. Corroded old solder can be really stubborn to melt, and all that's needed is a little bit of patience. And if that doesn't help, we'll use some flux. No, that's not coming off. I don't want to heat that board more than this. So let's do this proper. Add a good splash of flux. If you heat up one part of a PCB for long enough, the PCB will start to get skewed. So if a cap is too stubborn, it's much better to add flux and fresh solder and then have a second go instead. Okay, now those pads are nice and shiny again. So let's try again. No, what a stubborn cap. That didn't help. Well, in that case, I'm going to add some chip quick and mix it with the solder to lower the temperature it needs to melt. I'm going to add a really big blob. It's quite possible that the cap is stubborn to remove because of glue underneath. Okay, let's try again. Come on, you stubborn little cap. Here we go. Apparently this cap too had leaked and caused some minor corrosion to these two through holes. But I think they are still okay. These two pads seem okay. Then we've got this guy in the corner here. Electrolyte went this way, and the corrosion caused this through hole here to completely disappear. However, I don't think this is a big issue, because this pad seems to be for an optional J1. This board also has quite a lot of unused pads for caps on this side. And then there's a large optional J4 up in this corner. Well, I'll replace these caps off camera, and then this board too is done. Before we power this machine up, let's have a look inside the power supply. I was actually only able to find one screw that's holding the power supply in. So if it has more screws, they must be hidden. Or perhaps it's also held down with some tabs. There are no screws underneath here, but I think there might be some kind of hooks here. The thing with vintage Macs is that the plastics are sometimes very fragile. So I don't want to remove this plastic cover at the back here unless I absolutely have to. But there could of course be screws behind here. So instead, let's see if we can pry it forward. Yeah, that seems to work. So here comes the power supply. I don't think this Mac has been used much, because I don't have any memory of ever cleaning it. And yet that fan is very clean. And while we take it apart, my usual disclaimer: please don't mess around inside power supplies. Some of the caps inside can be charged with mains voltage, even with the cord unplugged. That being said, let's take a look inside and see if we have any smelly surprises. Okay, with 4 screws out, let's see if we can pry it apart. Well, not easily. Oh, I'm glad I checked inside here. Nasty little smelly reefers. And of course they are cracked and ready to go bang. If this is all new to you, these guys here, they tend to explode. And they smell really bad. Last time I blew one of these up, my studio smelled badly for several days. So these guys are gonna have to go. Inside here there is some dust. So this machine has at least seen some use. It's not bad enough to need a wash. So I'll just have a quick go with the hoover once we've got that PCB out. Okay, I removed 5 screws from the PCB. And then we have 2 screws for the ground cables here. Unfortunately, the IEC connectors are soldered directly to the board. So I'm not sure how this will come apart. So we need to cut this zip tie here first. And then remove this regional power switch. Unfortunately, the IEC connectors are removed by pushing them out. And to push them out, we have to desolder all the wires. So let's see if we can replace those reefers without completely taking the PCB out. So 1 more zip tie to cut. Actually, 2 more. Now let's see if we can tilt that PCB up and out enough to reach the solder pads of those reefer caps. Yes, we can. Awesome. This is a single layer board, so no need to add fresh solder. These should come out very easily and quickly. And about wiggling, by the way, as you noticed, I do wiggle, but only if the pads are large enough, so I don't scratch up the solder mask around the pad. Yeah, that only took a few seconds to desolder all 3 caps. Okay, and these nasty little buggers are 4700 picofarad Y2 caps. And these are common enough, so we can borrow some modern replacements from an upcoming project. And I'll just go ahead and order some more. This is a very common value, so I'll probably stash up with a few extra. Okay, caps are soldered. Nice and neat. Modern blue caps that hopefully aren't going to blow and smell badly. I cleaned and reassembled the power supply off camera. And I somehow remembered to reinstall all the zip ties. Well, I think the easiest way to test this machine is to just put the power supply and the board back in. The reason why this machine is partially disassembled is because I got it very yellow. So I did some retrobrites a few years back, and then I sort of forgot about this project. So in a way I'm glad it stopped working, otherwise I would have blown those damn refas. I actually even started recording a video about this machine in my old studio, but for whatever reason I decided not to finish that video, and I don't remember why. And now I can reinstall that funky CPU card. I don't remember if this machine requires a battery to boot, so let's install one, just in case. Okay, time for the tests. The display obviously needs some restoration too, but that's gonna be for another video. Let's see if this display even works. Well, the LED didn't light up, so that's a bad sign. Okay, fingers crossed. Here goes. Okay, chimed. The hard drive spun up. We've got some high voltage. And there's some noise coming from the speakers on the display. Oh crap. Something popped. Twice. Oh come on. We already blew something up last week. Seriously, 2 weeks in a row. We just blew up the Commodore PET last week. Now the AppleVision too. Well, I guess I need to record a restoration video of this massive AppleVision. But the Mac seems to work. So I guess I'll go and grab another display. Well, I'm not sure where we should go from here. It doesn't smell refa. And it sounded like something much smaller popped. Perhaps some tiny caps. But let's continue with the test with a different display. Fingers crossed again. Okay, chimes. We've got something on the screen. Okay, so at least the Mac works, and apparently it had Prince of Persia installed. But the CD-ROM isn't working. I tried to run a game from the CD, but it wouldn't work. So we're gonna have to revisit this project in the future. So we fixed one, broke one. Not sure where we should go from here. Let me do some thinking. Wow, this is some fancy modern version of Prince of Persia. This doesn't look anything like the original. Yeah, these are pretty fancy graphics. Completely different from the versions I've seen before. Fancy Mac, huh? But this keyboard is absolutely hopeless to play with. I have no idea what Apple was thinking when designing this keyboard. The left cursor key is over here and the right cursor key here. Then we've got down and up. Completely impossible to use for gaming. Well, I thought we would finish the reassembly while I do some thinking here. Unfortunately, I found another issue. The power switch is broken off. I think there are some bits missing here. So I need to order a printed replacement. At the back of the Mac there is a panel with some more connectors that installs in here. And then to the motherboard with a cable. The speaker and the power LED are installed in a plastic box. So let's reconnect them and install them back here. Oh, I almost forgot to talk about these weird slots. So these 4 slots back here are for VRAM. This guy here is for an optional ROM. Here's the cache in the middle. And the rest of these guys here are for RAM. This board can take a silly amount of RAM. Unofficially it will take 1 gig of RAM, which is pretty crazy for a machine from 1997. I have the front cover for the CD-ROM drive. It has been removed because I did some retrobrite to this machine. And I'm going to leave it off, since we need to repair that drive. And we repaired and restored an IBM display just 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to put this project aside for a while. I want to keep a mix of stuff on the channel and not do too many displays in a row. So we're going to get back to this project, see if we can fix this display. And in that video we're also going to fix the CD-ROM drive and replace the power switch with a printed part. So the only thing I need to figure out now is what the perfect matching game is for this machine. Mist comes to mind, but it doesn't require this much power, so there's probably a better match. The Big Apple display also needs some retro bright, so I'll probably record that video in June or thereabouts. Now let's get back to the Color Classic. See if it will misbehave enough for us to troubleshoot it. No, that image is pretty perfect, unfortunately. Well, this is kind of annoying. It's the second day I'm recording here, and the image is still perfect. And these wavy lines are created by the camera. The image is in fact perfect. Well, I think we should try something at least. My main suspect right now is one of the adjustment pots. I will explain why in a minute, because this machine has a weird quirk. So what I want to try now is to adjust those pots and see if I can make that video messed up like we had before. This machine has two accessible pots at the back, and I don't remember which one was the suspect. And apparently I don't remember which tool I used to adjust it. Here we go. Okay, so that moves the image sideways. How about the other one? Okay, that moves the image up and down. And it doesn't make the machine misbehave either. So I was probably wrong. In that case, I'm a bit stumped here. If it doesn't misbehave, it's very difficult to troubleshoot. Well, the display needs some adjustment anyways, so I remove the cover. This machine has a silly amount of adjustment pots in a long row back here. Only two of them are accessible through the back here. This machine has a fan installed in the case here that sucks out air from inside the machine and out through the back. But apparently it doesn't have enough vent holes. So this machine is sucking air through one of the holes for the adjustment pots. So one of these pots was just completely jam-packed with dust. So that is why I suspected bad pot. And especially since the image moved left and right. Okay, let's mess around with these pots at the back and see what happens. Now all these pots seems to be working fine. Oh, okay, now it started to misbehave again. And it actually made a noise. Okay, so did that have something to do with me adjusting the pin cushion? Or was that just a coincidence? Oh, now the image went brighter. Yes, something is definitely going on here. So, here's our issue. Now, what the heck could cause this? I'll shut the machine down and see if it disappears when it gets cold. Yeah, did you see those white lines? That implies that the gain went up. So what the heck could go wrong with the gain circuitry on a display? I'll let it cool down for a few minutes and see if this is caused by heat. Okay, so here's our gain adjustment. This pot here. So quite possibly there is something wrong with the circuitry here. So for the next test I'm going to turn the display on and adjust this pot, just to see how it behaves. Okay, the image is back to normal again. So maybe the display needs to get warm for that issue to appear again. Now let's mess around with that pot. Well, the pot seems to work. And it doesn't seem to be glitchy. So I'm going to wait here until the display gets warm again and see if that issue reappears. And while I wait, I'm going to mess around with the pots at the back, just to see if me adjusting those pots trigger that issue. Okay, no, I tried all the pots. I couldn't trigger it to get that issue. And it's actually the next day again. I just turned this machine on and I can actually see some white lines going across the screen. Not sure if you can see them on camera. They are barely visible. Maybe if I move in real close. Yeah, I think you should be able to see those lines now. So, how about if we lower the gain? Yeah, now the display is actually misbehaving. It sort of flashes. Let's go to Control Panel and Screen. Okay, brightness is roughly 50%. But the contrast is turned down quite a bit. So let's crank it up to above 50% too. And then lower the gain with adjustment pots on the side. Well, the image actually looks much better. So that was definitely the way to go. And yeah, I think those lines went away too. So was this issue caused by a too high gain? Okay, I moved in as close as I can with the camera. And as you can see, those stripes are completely gone. Well, the image was really good before, and now it's even better. It's very sharp, and colors are vivid, and it's perfectly stable. Well, I can't do anything more, as long as it's working. Well, in that case, I'll turn the Color Classic on while I edit this video, and let it run for a couple of hours. And we'll see if it starts misbehaving again. And here's an interesting size comparison for you. The AppleVision is an absolute monster of a display. I still have 1 hour before I have to edit and upload. So let's take a look inside that monster and see what popped. I think these displays were available without this huge boombox. So this is the AppleVision 1710 AV display. So I guess there was a non-AV version. So I think we need to remove the boombox first. And I found some recessed screws from underneath here. They also seem to be made of different plastics, because the speaker box here hasn't yellowed like the rest of the case. And a couple of more screws down here. So you may need a Mac cracker to get inside one of these. Okay, and it almost fell to the floor. We've got some cables and connectors inside here. This thing is heavy, really heavy. Those are some serious speakers. So there was probably a different stand you could use here instead of that speaker box. And then we have 2 screws on each side. Okay, let's see if that back will come off. Being extra careful, since this is a vintage Mac. They are known to be a bit fragile. Okay, let's see what happened here. Oh, no way. You're kidding me. The anode cap has popped off. Unbelievable. Well, that's definitely a first. How the heck is that even possible? Well, no wonder we had some popping sounds. Must have been some arcing going from the cap to ground. Well, I did a visual inspection. It's all Nichicon caps. There are no refus. And this display is mint inside. The only thing bad with this display is that it has gone yellow. Well, in that case, I'm just going to clean this area here with IPA to get all the old dielectric grease off, which had dried up completely anyways. And same thing inside the cap here. The rubber cap is still nice and soft, so that's not our issue either. I'm gonna do a test fit before I reapply the grease. Yeah, that sits very firmly. So why the heck did it pop off? That is so bizarre. Let's remove it again and apply a thin coat of dielectric grease inside the cap. Yeah, that cap is very nice and soft. Very strange that it popped off. Perhaps someone dropped this display. But being a fragile Mac, I would expect it to fall into 1 million pieces if someone would drop it. Okay, and again, it sits extremely firmly. I guess we could secure it with a zip tie here. Just in case it decides to pop off again. Well, in that case, I guess we should test it. Let's hope nothing pops this time. So I'll turn the power on. Okay, nothing happened. Let's push that power switch. Nothing happened. Oh, I just realized we don't need a power switch on the Mac, since it started from the keyboard. Okay, keep our fingers crossed. We've got high voltage. And it's working. It does have a weird error without any information though. Wow, that is a beautiful display. Something smells warm, so I'll turn the power off. Although it could be just nothing. I mean, some of my old displays, they just smell warm electronics. But they work perfectly fine. But I really don't want to risk this one. So, what do you guys think? Should we go for a full recap? I did a second inspection, of course, but all the caps and everything looks fine. In fact, this is quite possibly the cleanest display I have ever been inside. It's absolutely mint. But caps go bad, even without use. So, I don't know. Maybe we should just replace them. Well, I did a partial edit here and had the Color Classic running for about 1 hour. And that image is perfect and stable. So, I'm not sure, but maybe the gain was just cranked up too high. I'm gonna have to use it for a while and get back to this machine when I know. And since the Commodore PET smelled some warm electronics before it blew up... I'm thinking perhaps I should recap this AppleVision before I start using it. But at least the Power Macintosh repair was successful. I'll get back to this machine too, when I have parts to repair the CD-ROM drive. I'll make a follow-up video and put a link on the screen here when it's done. If you're watching this fresh, hit the bell icon below and set it to all to get a notification from YouTube when the next video is out. I will end by saying thank you to my patrons. I appreciate your support. If you want to support me too, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get ad-free early access. If you like this video, let me know with a thumbs up in the comments. If you're a regular viewer, consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.